this is the book Thiaoouba Prophecy, and this person, Michel, he's a Frenchman who lives in Australia, and he was invited to this planet, and this is part of his experience for him to understand the origin of Jews. Let's start.
This Earth is visited, as are many other inhabitable planets scattered throughout the universe. Sometimes the inhabitants of certain planets are obliged to evacuate as their planet is dying. Now, as Archie also explained, you can't change planets as you might change houses. You must conform to a cycle that is well established, otherwise, catastrophes can be the consequence. This is what happened 12,000 years ago. Human beings left the planet Hebra in order to visit the galaxy in search of a new planet of the same category as their own, for they knew that, in the millennium to come, their planet would become totally uninhabitable. A spacecraft, capable of extremely high speeds, experienced serious problems during its reconnaissance flight and was obliged to land on your planet. It landed in the region of Krasnodar, a town in western Russia. Needless to say, at the time there was no town, no people, no Russia. On board the spacecraft were 8 astronauts, 3 women and 5 men. These people were approximately 170 centimeters in height, with black eyes, fair skin, and long brown hair. They made a successful landing and began repairs to their vessel. 1. Alternate spelling, Akhenaten, editor's note. 132 Thiaoouba Prophecy. They found the gravitational force stronger than on their own planet and, initially, had some difficulty moving about. They established a camp near their spacecraft, expecting repairs to take some time. One day, during work, an accident occurred, causing a terrific explosion that destroyed half of the vessel and killed 5 of the cosmonauts. The other 3, being some distance away, were unharmed. They were Robanin, a man, and Lydia and Dina, 2 women. They knew well what was in store for them. Coming from a planet of a superior category, they did not belong on Earth, where they were in fact prisoners, and thus they anticipated the misadventures that befell them. The accident came as no great surprise. For several months, the 3 remained at the spot where the season was warm. They had some weapons, and they were able to procure their provisions of manna and rushton having been lost in the explosion. Eventually the cold arrived, and they decided to move further south. The gravitational force made walking long distances extremely difficult for them, so that their trek south to warmer climates became a veritable road to Calvary. They passed by the Black Sea heading in the direction of today's Israel. The journey took months, but they were young people and, astonishingly, they made it. The weather became more clement and even hot as they reached lower latitudes. They stopped by a river, establishing there a permanent camp, all the more permanent since Dina was several months pregnant. At full term, she gave birth to a son whom they named Ranan. By then, Lydia too was pregnant, and some time later, she also bore a son, Rabian. These people from Hebra acclimatized in this spot which was rich in game, honey and edible plants, and there they founded their line. It was quite some time later that they made the acquaintance of some nomads passing by. This was their first contact with Earthlings. The nomads numbered 10 and, having found Robanin's women to their liking, they wanted to kill him and take all that he had, including the women. Robanin still had his weapon and, although a pacifist, he was obliged to use it and killed 4 of his attackers who fled in the face of such power. These people were greatly saddened that they had to resort to such a measure, and saw in it yet another sign that they were on a planet that was forbidden to them by universal law. I don't understand, I interrupted. I thought that it wasn't possible to jump categories in a forward direction, but that it would be possible to go to inferior planets. No, Michel, neither forwards nor backwards. If you go forward, disregarding universal law, you will die. If you go backwards, you expose yourself to worse conditions because your advanced spirituality can't exist in a materialistic environment. A Different Alien and My Former Lives 133. If you like, I can give you an analogy in the form of a childish comparison. Imagine a man immaculately dressed in polished shoes, white socks, and pressed suit. You oblige this man to walk through a farmyard 30 centimeters deep in mud. Further, you insist that he put this mud into a wheelbarrow with his hands. No need to ask what state he will be in when he has finished. Nonetheless, our group of extraterrestrials founded their line that became the ancestors of present-day Jews. The Bible was written later by scribes who retraced the history of these people, distorting it, as legend became mixed with reality. I can affirm for you that the Adam of the Bible was, not the first man on earth, far from it, but he was called Robanan, and he didn't have a wife called Eve, but 2 wives named Levia and Dinah. The race of Jews developed from these 3, without mixing with other races because, by atavism 1, they felt themselves superior, and indeed they were. However, I must assure you that the original 2 Bible is not the product of the scribe's imagination, nor is it embellished. There was much truth in it. I say was because in the various councils of the Roman Catholic Church, the Bible has been greatly revised, for reasons which are clear, to serve the needs of Christianity. This is why I said yesterday that religions are one of the curses of earth. I must also enlighten you in regard to several other biblical points. Shortly after the arrival of the Hebrews on earth, we helped them on several occasions. We also punished them. For example, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was caused by one of our space vehicles. The people of those 2 towns were presenting a bad example and acting dangerously for the people in contact with them. We tried various means in an endeavor to put them back on the right track, but in vain. We had to be ruthless. Each time that you read in the Bible, and the Lord God said this or that you should read in the inhabitants of Thiaoouba said, why not save them in the beginning and take them back to their planet, or to another of the same category? That is, of course, a reasonable question, Michelle, but there is a snag. We can't predict the future more than 100 years in advance. We thought, at the time, that, being such a small group, they might not survive, and, if they did, they would mix with other races, and thus be absorbed by other peoples and rendered impure. We guessed that this would occur within a century, but such was not the case. Even now, as you know, the race is still almost as pure as it was 12,000 years ago. As I told you, by means of religious councils, priests erased or changed many things in the Bible, but others survived and can easily be explained. 1. Atavism here aiming to maintain/reconstruct the original characteristics. The first generations of people described in the Bible lived up to 900 years. Editor's note 2. Editors comment in agreement with the author. 134 Thiaoouba Prophecy. In chapter 18, verse 1, the scribe refers to our appearance at that time, saying, "The Lord God appeared unto him among the oaks of Mamre as he sat at the entrance to his tent in the heat of day." The scribe is speaking of Abraham in this chapter. 2. He, Abraham, looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he ran to them, and fell to the ground before them. 3. And he said, "Lord and Master, if I have found grace in your eyes, I beg you not to go far from your servant." Abraham invites the 3 men to stay. The scribe refers to them as men 1 minute, and yet one of them is also called the Lord God. He speaks to them, and each time, it is the one referred to as the Lord God who replies. Now, the priests of the Roman Catholic Church find this in formal contradiction with their views, as do many other religions, for they will tell you that no one can imagine the face of God, that one would be blinded by it. In a sense they are right, since the Creator, being a pure spirit, has no face. According to the scribe, Abraham converses with the Lord God as he would with a high-ranking lord on earth. And the Lord God answers him, and is accompanied by 2 other men. The scribe does not speak of angels. Isn't it odd that God comes down to earth in the form of a man, accompanied, not by angels, but by men? Actually, there, and in many other places in the Bible, it is easy for someone of good faith to see that God has never spoken to any human being. 1. He could not have done so, since it is astral bodies which aspire towards him, and not God who leans towards them. That would be like a river flowing backwards. You have never seen a river flowing from the sea to the mountaintop, have you? A passage from the Bible, 2 pages further on from the one just mentioned, is also quite amusing. Chapter 19, verse 1. The 2 angels arrived in Sodom, and Lot was seated at the gates to Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to go and kiss the ground in front of them. Then he manages to get them to go to his house, and suddenly, in verse 5, they called Lot and said to him, "Where are the men who entered your house?" Now the scribe is referring to them as men. Next, in verse 10, the men reached out, made Lot come inside, and closed the door. 11, and they struck blind everyone at the entrance to the house, from the smallest to the largest person, so that it was useless for them to try to find the door. 1. God has never spoken in the oldest available. The Hebrew version of the Bible, Jehovah, is one of many names for God. All other translations mix them up completely, replacing the exact names by Father, Lord, or God. From the Hebrew version, it is clear that it was Jehovah who talked to people, appeared in human form, made miracles, not God, the Creator. From the information contained in this book, it is clear that God is God, the Great Spirit, and Jehovah equals Thiaoouba. In the context of this single detail, the entire Bible makes much more sense and becomes fascinating reading. Editor: A Different Alien and My Former Lives 135. It is easy to see the lack of precision in this passage, where the scribe begins by speaking of 2 angels, then speaks of 2 men, and then describes 2 men striking people blind. According to the Bible, such a miracle requires at least an angel. There, my dear, is another good example of confusion in earthly scripts. The men were quite simply our men from Thiaoouba. Thus we guided and helped the Jews, for it would have been a shame to let a race so spiritually evolved sink back into ignorance and savagery only because it had accidentally committed the error of coming to a planet which was not appropriate for it. We helped them in the centuries that followed, and it is this that certain scribes have tried to explain by writing the accounts that have formed the Bible. Often they were in good faith. At times, they have distorted the facts, although not purposely. The only times this distortion was purposely done, and for very specific reasons, as I have said, was by the Roman Church during the councils of Nicene. AD 325, Constantinople in AD 381, Ephes in AD 431, and Chalcedon in AD 451. There were others too, but of lesser significance. The Bible is not the book of God, as many people on earth believe it to be. It is simply a document of ancient history, much modified and full of embellishments, added by writers different from the original scribes. For example, let's go back to Egypt and the time of the Exodus, which interests people on earth. I'm going to restore the truth concerning this, for you and for others, before going further. Let's go back, then, to Egypt, where we find that the descendants of the cosmonauts have become the Hebrew people, the name deriving from that of their planet, Hebra. Since arriving accidentally on your planet, this race has experienced great difficulties. It experienced them then, and it experiences them still. As you know, the Jews are very intelligent by comparison with other races. They have a religion which is quite different, and they don't mix with other races. Marriages are almost always among their own kind. Because of inexorable universal law, they have always suffered persecution, much of which has occurred in recent times. As a result, their astral bodies were liberated and therefore able to proceed directly to more highly evolved planets where they belong. As you also know, a group of Hebrews traveled with Joseph, son of Jacob, into Egypt, where they established a line, only to end up being hated by the Egyptians, and always for the same unstated reasons: their intelligence and, particularly, their solidarity in the face of adversity. Action was needed.
We'll read more next time.